The night after Noah's performance, Ethan barely slept. The melody kept replaying in his mind, not because it was beautiful, although it was, but because every note felt like it was carrying a secret. He sat at his small desk by the window, surrounded by sketches he had forgotten to finish, staring at a blank page for nearly an hour. His pencil rested between his fingers, but his thoughts were somewhere else. Somewhere on that stage. Somewhere in Noah's voice. "That cannot be about me," Ethan whispered to himself. Saying it out loud almost made it easier to believe. Noah Bennett was his best friend. His talented, confident, impossible-to-ignore best friend. People like Noah wrote songs about incredible moments, unforgettable places, and people who changed their lives. Ethan was just the person who brought extra coffee to rehearsals and reminded Noah when he forgot his schedule. He was the person standing beside the stage, not the person inspiring the music. At least, that was the story Ethan had repeated to himself for years. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the art studio earlier than usual. The familiar smell of paint and paper usually calmed him. But today, everything felt different. Every sound reminded him of the night before. The students laughing in the hallway. The musicians carrying equipment across the room. The posters from previous festivals hanging on the walls. And then there was Noah. "You disappeared pretty quickly after the show," Noah said with a small smile. Ethan looked up from his sketchbook. "I was tired." It was the easiest excuse. Noah tilted his head slightly, studying him the way he always did. That was the problem with Noah. He noticed things. Small things. Things Ethan wished he could hide. "You liked the song?" Noah asked. Ethan looked down at his drawing. "It was amazing." "That is not what I asked." The quiet honesty in Noah's voice made Ethan pause. For a moment, he almost told the truth. He almost said that the song felt familiar. He almost asked the question that had been keeping him awake all night. Instead, he smiled softly. "You always write amazing songs." Noah looked like he wanted to say more, but he stopped. The moment passed. Later that afternoon, while helping organize supplies, Ethan found an old notebook hidden behind a stack of art folders. The cover was worn, the corners bent from years of use. His heart skipped when he recognized it. It was his old songwriting notebook, the one he thought he had lost during his first year at the university. Inside were pages filled with unfinished lyrics, random thoughts, and emotions he had never shared with anyone. Ethan slowly opened it. Some pages were missing. He remembered writing them late at night, when he could not explain how he felt. He remembered creating words he was too afraid to speak. He remembered writing about someone who made ordinary days feel special, someone who made him feel seen. His hands became still when he noticed something unexpected. A small note was tucked between the pages. The handwriting was familiar. Noah's handwriting. Ethan stared at the message, his heartbeat growing louder with every second. "I found this years ago. I hope someday you understand how much these words mean." Ethan read the sentence again and again. Because suddenly, the question was no longer whether Noah's song was about him. The question was something much bigger. How long had Noah known? The note stayed in Ethan's hands for what felt like an entire lifetime. The busy art studio around him continued moving, but somehow every sound became distant. Students walked past carrying supplies. Conversations echoed through the hallway, and sunlight stretched across the floor, yet Ethan could only see those few handwritten words. Noah had found his notebook years ago. Noah had read the thoughts Ethan was too afraid to share. Ethan slowly closed the notebook, his fingers resting on the worn cover. 1,000 questions rushed through his mind. Why did Noah keep it? Why did he never say anything? Why did he turn those private words into a song? Before Ethan could find an answer, he heard footsteps behind him. "I was wondering where that went." Ethan froze. Noah stood near the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Noah looked at the notebook, then back at Ethan. There was no surprise on his face. Only quiet. Understanding. "You knew," Ethan said softly. Noah placed the coffee down on the table. "I knew it was yours." Ethan looked away. "That is not what I meant." The silence between them felt heavier than any conversation they had ever shared. Noah took a breath. "Yes." One simple word. One honest answer. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Not because he was hurt, but because suddenly everything made sense. The little moments. The encouragement. The way Noah always saved a seat for him. The way Noah remembered every small detail Ethan thought nobody noticed. "How long?" Ethan asked. Noah looked at the floor for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Since our first year. Ethan blinked. For years. Noah nodded. I found the notebook after you left it in the studio. I was going to return it immediately, but I saw one page. Just one. I did not mean to read more. Ethan waited. Noah continued carefully. But those words stayed with me. Ethan looked at the notebook again. He remembered those pages. They were not perfect lyrics. They were messy thoughts written during lonely nights. They were feelings he never planned to show anyone. You turned them into a song, Ethan whispered. Noah smiled gently. Because they deserved to be heard. The answer caught Ethan completely off guard. He expected embarrassment. He expected awkwardness. He expected Noah to apologize. Instead, Noah looked at those old words like they were something precious. Why did you never tell me? Ethan asked. Noah's expression softened. Because I was afraid. That surprised Ethan more than anything else. Noah Bennett was never afraid on stage. He could stand in front of hundreds of people without hesitation. You? Ethan said quietly. You were afraid? Noah laughed softly. Everyone thinks confidence means you are never scared. That is not true. He looked directly at Ethan. I was scared of losing the person who mattered most to me. For the first time, Ethan did not have a quick response. He had spent years believing he was invisible. But Noah had been paying attention all along. The person he thought was too far away had been standing beside him the entire time. And maybe the most unforgettable moments were not the ones shared with a crowd. Maybe they were the quiet ones when two people finally stopped hiding the truth. The next few days felt strangely different for Ethan. Nothing around him had changed, yet everything felt like it carried a hidden meaning. The same streets of Brooklyn looked brighter. The same coffee shop where he and Noah always met felt warmer. Even the quiet moments between conversations no longer felt empty. They felt full of things neither of them had said yet. Ethan tried to understand what had happened, but his thoughts kept returning to one question. If Noah had known for years, why had he waited? He found Noah after rehearsal, sitting alone in the small music room where they used to spend hours talking about dreams they were not sure they could achieve. The room was filled with old instruments, handwritten lyrics, and memories that seemed to live between the walls. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Noah looked up and smiled. You can ask me anything. Ethan hesitated. Why did you keep it a secret? Noah knew exactly what Ethan meant. He looked down at his guitar, running his fingers gently along the strings. Because I did not want my feelings to become a burden for you. Ethan was quiet. Noah continued. You were always so hard on yourself. You always thought you had to prove you deserved to be noticed. I did not want you to think my feelings were another thing you had to carry. Those words stayed with Ethan. For years, he had believed being loved meant someone had to see past his flaws. But Noah had never looked at him like he was something that needed to be fixed. Noah simply saw him. You know what is funny? Ethan said with a small smile. I always thought you were the fearless one. Noah laughed softly. I am not fearless. I just learned how to stand on stage even when I am nervous. He paused. But standing in front of you and telling you how I feel, that was always harder. Ethan looked away, feeling emotions he did not know how to name. He had spent so much time believing he was the only one holding a secret. He never imagined Noah had been protecting one too. Outside the window, the city continued moving. Cars passed. Below, people walked through the streets, and life continued as usual. But inside that little music room, something between them had shifted. Ethan picked up the notebook from the table. I wrote those pages because I thought nobody would ever hear them. Noah smiled. I am glad I did. Ethan looked at him. Why? Noah answered without hesitation. Because they reminded me that the quietest person in the room can still have the biggest story. For once, Ethan did not argue. He did not make a joke. He did not try to convince himself that Noah was simply being kind. He allowed himself to believe it. Maybe he was not just someone standing behind the spotlight. Maybe he had always been part of the reason the light existed. But as Ethan looked at Noah, a new fear appeared. Not the fear of being unnoticed. Something much more complicated. The fear of finally being seen and wondering what would happen next. The days that followed were filled with small moments Ethan never expected to notice. A simple message from Noah in the morning could change his entire mood. A quick conversation after class could stay in his mind for hours. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no grand announcements, no perfect movie scene where everything suddenly became clear. Instead, there were quiet moments that slowly changed the way Ethan saw their relationship. For the first time, he stopped wondering if he mattered to Noah. The harder question became whether he was ready to accept that he did. One afternoon, Ethan and Noah walked through a small park near the art studio. The trees were beginning to change colors, and the sidewalks were covered with golden leaves. Noah carried 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Ethan without asking what he wanted. He already knew. Ethan smiled. "You still remember my order?" Noah looked surprised. "Of course I do." It was such a simple answer, but Ethan felt it differently now. Before, he thought Noah was just naturally thoughtful. Now he understood that Noah paid attention because he cared. "You know," Ethan said, looking ahead, "I spent a lot of time thinking you were out of my league." Noah stopped walking. "Out of your league?" Ethan laughed quietly. "You know what I mean. Everyone sees you. Everyone knows your name. You walk into a room and people notice." Noah looked at him carefully. "And you think nobody notices you?" Ethan did not answer. He did not need to. Noah already knew. "Ethan," Noah said softly, "do you remember the first drawing you ever showed me?" Ethan smiled slightly. "The terrible one with the unfinished background." "It was not terrible. It was absolutely terrible." Noah laughed. "Maybe the background needed work. But I remember the character you drew. You gave that character so much personality. I remember thinking, this person sees the world differently." Ethan looked down at his coffee. He had forgotten that moment. Noah had not. That was the difference. Ethan remembered his mistakes. Noah remembered his heart. Later that evening, they returned to the music room. Noah opened the old notebook again and carefully looked through the pages. "There is something I never told you," Noah said. Ethan looked up. "What?" Noah touched one of the pages gently. "When I found this, I was not just inspired by the words. I was inspired by the person who wrote them." Ethan felt his breath catch. Noah continued. "You wrote about finding beauty in ordinary things. A rainy afternoon. A quiet conversation. A person who makes you feel safe. You did not realize it, but you were already creating something beautiful." Ethan smiled softly. "You make me sound much more interesting than I am." Noah shook his head. "No, I think you never gave yourself enough credit." The room became quiet. Not uncomfortable. Not awkward. Just honest. Ethan realized something important. He had spent years waiting for someone to prove he was worth noticing. But maybe the first person who needed to believe that was himself. Noah did not make Ethan special. He simply reminded Ethan that he had always been. And for the first time, Ethan wondered what it would feel like to stop hiding from a story that had been waiting for him all along. For the first time in years, Ethan stopped running from the possibility of being loved. But accepting that someone cared about him was much easier than understanding what to do with that feeling. He had spent so long protecting himself from disappointment that happiness almost felt unfamiliar. Every time Noah smiled at him, every time their conversations lasted a little longer than expected, Ethan found himself wondering if he was imagining everything. Then one evening, Noah invited Ethan to his apartment to listen to some new music. It was a simple invitation, the kind they had shared many times before, but this time felt different. The apartment was quiet, filled with warm light and shelves covered with books, records, and small memories from years of creating music. Ethan looked around and smiled. "It is strange seeing this side of you." Noah looked up from his guitar. "What do you mean?" "Everyone sees the performer, the person on stage. But this feels like the real you." Noah smiled gently. "Maybe because you are one of the few people who actually sees me." Those words stayed with Ethan. He sat beside Noah as they listened to unfinished songs and talked about dreams they had never shared with anyone else. Noah showed him melodies that were still incomplete, ideas that had no ending yet. Ethan realized something. Noah, the person everyone admired, was also someone who carried doubts. Someone who wondered if his work was enough. Someone who needed reassurance too. "I always thought you had everything figured out," Ethan admitted. Noah laughed softly. "That is funny because I always thought you did." Ethan looked confused. "Me? Yes. You always know what you want to create. You always notice details other people miss. You make people feel understood." Ethan looked down, unsure how to respond. Compliments had always made him uncomfortable because he never knew if he deserved them. Noah noticed. He always noticed. "You do not have to believe me right away," Noah said. "But I hope someday you do." The honesty in his voice made Ethan realize something important. Noah was not trying to convince him with grand gestures. He was not trying to change Ethan into someone else. He was simply showing up, again and again, reminding him that he mattered. Later that night, Noah played a new melody on the guitar. It was softer than the song from the festival. It was unfinished, with pauses between the notes. What do you think? Noah asked. Ethan listened carefully. It sounds like someone trying to say something, but not knowing how. Noah smiled. That is exactly what it is. Ethan looked at him. About what? Noah looked at the guitar strings, then back at Ethan. About finding the courage to be honest. The room became quiet. Ethan could hear the gentle sound of the rain outside and the soft rhythm of the melody. For years, he had believed love was something that happened to other people. Something written in stories, songs, and movies. But sitting there with Noah, Ethan began to understand something different. Sometimes the most meaningful stories were not created all at once. Sometimes they were built through small moments, patient understanding, and two people slowly learning that they were never as far apart as they thought. For the next few days, Ethan carried a strange feeling with him. It was not fear exactly. It was something quieter, something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Hope. The kind of hope that made him smile at random moments and then immediately question why he was smiling. He still could not believe how much had changed between him and Noah. They were still the same two people who joked about bad coffee, complained about deadlines, and spent hours talking about creative ideas. But now there was a new honesty between them, a new understanding that made every conversation feel deeper. Still, Ethan had one thing he needed to face: himself. He realized that accepting Noah's feelings was only the beginning. The harder part was believing he was worthy of them. One afternoon, while working on a new illustration project, Ethan found himself staring at a blank page again. In the past, a blank page always felt like pressure, like a reminder that he had something to prove. But this time, he remembered something Noah had said. The quietest person in the room can still have the biggest story. Ethan picked up his pencil and started drawing. For the first time in a long time, he created something without worrying about whether people would approve. He simply created because he wanted to. Later that day, Noah stopped by the studio and saw the finished piece. He stood there silently for a moment. Ethan immediately became nervous. "It is probably not that good," Ethan said. Noah looked at him. "Why do you always say that before anyone even reacts?" Ethan paused. He did not have an answer. Noah walked closer to the artwork. "Ethan, this is incredible." Ethan smiled awkwardly. "You have to say that. You are my friend." Noah shook his head. "No, I say it because it is true." That simple sentence meant more than Ethan expected. Because Noah was not only talking about the drawing. He was talking about Ethan. That evening, they attended a small community event where local artists and musicians shared their work. Noah was invited to perform, and Ethan displayed some of his illustrations. For years, Ethan would have stayed near the back of the room. He would have let everyone else take the attention while he quietly disappeared. But this time, when Noah introduced him, Ethan stepped forward. "This is Ethan Parker," Noah told the audience. "He creates art that makes ordinary moments feel unforgettable." Ethan looked at Noah, surprised by the words. Then he looked at the people listening. For once, he did not feel like he needed to hide. After the event, they stood outside under the city lights. The streets were busy, but the moment felt peaceful. "You know," Ethan said, "I think I finally understand something." Noah smiled. "What?" Ethan looked at him. "I spent so much time waiting for someone to notice me that I forgot I was allowed to be seen." Noah's expression softened. "You were always worth seeing." Ethan smiled. The words were simple, but they felt like a promise. And as they walked through the city together, Ethan realized the biggest change was not that Noah had found him. The biggest change was that Ethan had finally stopped hiding from himself. The night after the community event, Ethan found himself standing in front of the same blank page that once made him feel uncertain. But this time, the silence felt different. It was not a reminder of everything he thought he lacked. It felt like an invitation. For years, Ethan had been afraid of creating something too personal because he believed people might judge him. Now he understood that the most meaningful art came from honesty. He looked at the sketch in front of him and smiled. It was a simple drawing of a person standing beneath a stage light, surrounded by shadows that slowly faded away. It was not about being the center of attention. It was about finally allowing himself to step into the light. A few days later, Noah invited Ethan to the place where his music journey had started. It was a small neighborhood theater that held fewer than 100 seats. The walls were covered with old posters from past performances, and the wooden stage carried years of memories. "This place changed my life," Noah said as they walked inside. Ethan looked around. Because you performed here? Noah smiled. Not exactly. He walked toward the stage. Because this was the first place where I realized I wanted to share my feelings through music. Ethan watched him quietly. Noah had performed in front of hundreds of people, but this small empty theater seemed more important to him. Why bring me here? Ethan asked. Noah looked at him. Because I wanted you to see where it started. Noah picked up his guitar and sat beneath the soft stage lights. There was no crowd, no cameras, no pressure, just two people sharing a moment that belonged only to them. He began playing the familiar melody from the festival, but this time Ethan heard it differently. Before, he had heard a song. Now, he heard a conversation. Every note carried years of friendship, patience, and feelings that had waited quietly. When the song ended, the room became still. Ethan looked at Noah. You really kept all of that inside for so long? Noah smiled softly. So did you. Ethan laughed because he knew it was true. They had both spent years protecting themselves, both afraid that honesty might change everything. But maybe honesty was the thing that finally allowed everything to become real. I do not know what happens next, Ethan admitted. Noah nodded. Neither do I. The answer surprised Ethan. He expected Noah to have everything planned. Instead, Noah was simply being honest. But, Noah continued, I know I want to find out. Ethan felt a quiet warmth spread through him. There was no dramatic moment that changed their lives forever. No perfect words that solved every fear. There was just trust. There was understanding. There was the choice to move forward together. Ethan stepped closer to the stage and looked at the empty seats. Once, he would have imagined himself sitting somewhere in the back, watching someone else shine. Now he realized he was standing beside the person who had always believed he belonged there too. And as the last notes of the melody faded into the quiet theater, Ethan finally understood that some moments become unforgettable not because the world witnesses them, but because the right person is there to share them. Months passed, and Ethan's life slowly began to change in ways he never expected. The biggest difference was not that people suddenly noticed him. It was that he no longer needed them to. He still worked quietly in his art studio. He still enjoyed peaceful mornings with a cup of coffee and a blank page waiting in front of him. But now, every creation carried a different feeling. It was no longer about proving that he was talented enough. It was about sharing a piece of himself with the world. Noah continued performing, and his music reached more people than ever before. But no matter how busy his schedule became, he always made time for Ethan. Sometimes they spent evenings talking about ideas. Sometimes they simply sat together in comfortable silence. Ethan used to think silence meant distance. With Noah, he learned that silence could also mean understanding. 1 year after the festival where everything changed, Noah returned to the same theater where he had first shared his song. This time, the room was filled with people. Friends, artists, musicians, and supporters gathered to celebrate his newest collection of music. Ethan stood near the side of the stage, watching Noah prepare. The familiar nervous feeling returned, but this time it was different. Ethan was not afraid of being unseen. He was simply excited to witness another important moment in Noah's journey. Before starting the final song, Noah looked across the audience. Then his eyes found Ethan. There are some people who change your life without even realizing it, Noah said. They do not have to be the loudest person in the room. They do not have to search for attention. Sometimes, they simply exist, and somehow the world feels different because they are there. Ethan felt his heart soften. He knew those words. Not because they sounded familiar, but because he finally understood them. Noah began playing the melody that started everything. The audience listened quietly as the music filled the theater. But Ethan no longer heard a song about a person he could never be. He heard a reminder of everything they had built together. After the performance, Ethan gave Noah a small gift. It was a framed illustration. The same image he had created after realizing he was allowed to step into the light. Noah looked at it carefully. You drew this for me? Ethan smiled. I did. Noah laughed softly. You know, I think this is the first time you made something and did not immediately apologize for it. Ethan smiled because he knew it was true. He had spent so many years questioning his own value that he forgot how much he already had to offer. Later that night, they walked through the city streets beneath the glow of the lights. The world around them continued moving, just like it always had. But Ethan knew something had changed forever. Some stories begin with a grand moment. Others begin with a quiet realization. His began with a song, a forgotten notebook, and someone who saw him before he learned how to see himself. And maybe that was the most beautiful part. The person who helped him find his voice had been listening all along.